The first place Naya Grey Wolf ever learned the power of words wasn't a classroom. It was a circle of firelight. Out on the red earth of the Apache lands, where the wind carried the smell of sage and dust, her grandmother used to sit on a low wooden stool and speak to the night. The flames would dance in her dark eyes as she told stories in a language older than fences, older than roads, older than the maps that tried to claim that land as something else. Naya would sit cross-legged in the sand, listening to every sound, every pause, every breath. Every word is alive, her grandmother used to say. When you speak, you don't just use your mouth, you use your people. Naya believed that. She grew up believing that language was more than sound. It was memory. It was backbone. It was a way of standing tall even when the world tried to bend you low. Back then, her world was wide open. The sky felt close enough to touch. The land didn't care who you were or what you owned. The wind treated everyone the same. Now, years later, her world was made of glass and steel. Manhattan rose around her like a canyon built by men instead of mountains. The streets roared day and night, a river of horns, footsteps, and voices that never truly slept. Neon signs replaced the stars. Cold pavement replaced warm sand. And in the middle of it all stood Naya Grey Wolf, wearing a black and white uniform that didn't belong to her. She adjusted the thin strap of her apron as she stepped onto the polished floor of Lorne, one of those French restaurants where the lights were always soft and the prices were always sharp. The air smelled like truffle oil and expensive perfume. Crystal glasses chimed gently with every movement, like tiny bells reminding everyone in the room how much their evening cost. Naya had been on her feet for 9 hours. Her shoes, bought from a discount store in Queens, rubbed against her heels with every step. Her legs ached in a way that went past pain and settled into something quieter, something heavier. To the people seated at the linen-covered tables, she wasn't Naya Grey Wolf. She wasn't a granddaughter of storytellers. She wasn't a woman who carried a language in her bones. She was a server, a hand that refilled water, a voice that recited specials, a shadow that moved in and out of their evenings without leaving a mark. She passed a table where two men in tailored suits talked about markets and mergers like they were swapping weather reports. Up today, down tomorrow. That's just how it goes. Another table laughed about a watch that cost more than her monthly rent. Someone waved her over with 2 fingers, like calling a dog. Naya kept her face calm, her posture straight. The mask of politeness was something she had learned to wear well. But under the apron, under the practiced smile, she carried a different life. She carried the sound of her grandmother's voice in the dark. She carried the rhythm of Apache words that didn't translate cleanly into English or French or anything spoken in this room. She carried the memory of classrooms, books, and long nights studying how language shaped power and how power tried to shape language right back. Standing there between tables of wealth and quiet arrogance, Naya felt like she was walking in 2 worlds that didn't know how to see each other. One world measured worth in stories, in history, in the way you treated the people beside you. The other measured it in cards made of metal, in bottles pulled from locked cabinets, in how much space you could take up without being questioned. A soft chime sounded near the entrance. The heavy wooden doors of Lorne opened, letting in a slice of the city's cold night air. A couple stepped inside, dressed in confidence and fine fabric, their presence shifting the mood of the room without a word being spoken. Naya glanced up for just a moment. She didn't know it yet, but the quiet balance she had built between who she was and who the world saw was about to crack. For now, she straightened her apron, lifted her tray, and walked forward. A girl from the dust roads, a woman under golden lights, still standing, still carrying her words. The heavy wooden doors of Lorone swung open with a slow, deliberate groan, like the doors of an old frontier saloon pushed wide by a man who expected the room to make space for him. Cold night air rolled in first, sharp and clean. Then he followed. Harrison Sterling didn't rush. He never did. Men like him believed the world should adjust its pace to match their stride. His shoes hit the polished floor with a steady, confident rhythm, the sound cutting through the soft music and low chatter like spurs on a quiet street. Naya felt it before she fully saw him. A shift in the room, a tightening of the air. Conversations dipped just a notch. A few heads turned. The kind of attention that wasn't admiration, but awareness. Harrison moved like a modern outlaw dressed in a tailored suit instead of a dust-stained coat. The navy fabric clung to his broad shoulders as if it had been built around him. His jaw was sharp, his hair perfectly set, not a strand daring to fall out of line. His eyes swept across the restaurant, not searching for a table, but searching for witnesses. Who was watching? Who mattered? Who didn't? That was how he measured a room. He paused just inside the doorway, giving everyone a moment to take him in. It was a habit, like tipping a hat that wasn't there. Then he stepped forward again, and the host, a nervous teenager with a menu clutched to his chest, nearly tripped over himself trying to greet him. "Good evening, sir. Right this way," the boy stammered. Harrison didn't answer. He barely looked at him. Behind Harrison walked Jessica. If Harrison was a storm cloud, Jessica was the bird caught in its shadow. She wore a deep red dress that looked like it had been chosen for her instead of by her. It fit perfectly, but she moved inside it carefully, like someone afraid to wrinkle something too expensive to replace. Her arms stayed close to her sides, her shoulders slightly drawn in. Her eyes didn't roam the room the way Harrison's did. They drifted down, then up, then away again, never settling. There was a quiet tension in her face, a practiced smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Naya watched them from across the floor, tray balanced on her shoulder. She had seen couples like this before, the powerful one and the quiet one, the one who took up space and the one who learned to live in what was left behind. Harrison strode past a row of tables and stopped at the one by the tall windows, the best view in the house. The city lights spilled in behind him, painting his silhouette in gold and silver. He didn't pull out a chair. He simply sat, spreading himself wide, claiming the space like a rancher dropping his gear in the middle of a dusty barroom. Jessica slipped into the seat across from him. The host set down the menus with shaking hands and scurried away like he'd just delivered a message to the wrong kind of man. Harrison leaned back, crossing one ankle over his knee. He checked his watch, a heavy, gleaming thing that caught the light like a small sun. "Finally," he muttered, just loud enough for Jessica to hear. "I thought this place was supposed to be efficient." Jessica nodded, though no one had asked her opinion. Across the room, Naya felt a knot tighten low in her stomach. There was a certain kind of person who walked into a space like this and didn't just want a meal. They wanted a stage. They wanted an audience. They wanted someone to push against, just to feel the world push back. Harrison Sterling smelled like that kind of trouble. Naya took a slow breath, steadying herself the way her grandmother had taught her. In through the nose, out through the mouth. Let the wind pass through you, not around you. She lifted her tray and walked toward the table. As she approached, Harrison's eyes flicked up. Not to her face, not at first. They went to her shoes, scuffed and tired, then to her hands, red from heat and soap, then finally to her eyes. A thin smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. Jessica noticed it too. Her fingers tightened around the edge of the menu. Harrison leaned closer to her and spoke in a low voice. But Naya caught the tone even if she didn't catch every word. "Watch this," he said, like a man about to flip a coin or throw a dart. "You can always tell what kind of place this is by how the help acts." Jessica's smile faltered. The lights above their table seemed to glow just a little brighter. The room felt just a little quieter, like the air before thunder rolls across open land. Naya stopped at the edge of the table. She didn't know it yet, but the storm had found its center, and it was sitting right in front of her. Naya set the glasses down with care, the bases kissing the linen tablecloth without a sound. She had learned to move that way, quiet, precise, almost invisible. In places like Loranie, the best service was the kind no one noticed at all. Harrison noticed. He picked up his water glass and held it to the light, turning it slowly between his fingers, like a man inspecting a coin he didn't trust. "Huh," he said. "You see that?" Jessica leaned forward, squinting. "See what?" "Right there, a streak." He tilted the glass so the light caught it just enough to make something, or nothing, appear. Hard to get decent help these days, I guess. Naya felt the words land on her like grit in the wind. She kept her face still. "I can replace it for you, sir," she said, already reaching for the tray. Harrison waved a hand, dismissing her like he was brushing away a fly. "Relax, I'm just saying. Standards are slipping everywhere." He leaned back in his chair, eyes never leaving her. Naya stepped away to fetch another glass. As she walked, her grandmother's voice rose in her memory, steady as a drumbeat. The one who loses their temper first loses the fight. Back at the table, Harrison watched her return, the faint smile still pulling at his mouth. He took a sip of the wine she poured and made a show of swishing it around, smacking his lips like a critic at a county fair. "Is this supposed to be good, or he asked. "Tastes flat, like it's been sitting around too long." Naya knew better. She had checked the cork herself. The bottle was clean, the pour perfect. "I can bring the sommelier if you'd like," she offered. Harrison's smile sharpened. "Why bother? I doubt he'd explain it any better than you could." Jessica shifted in her seat, her fingers curled around her napkin. Naya felt the room closing in around the table, the way a circle tightens around a campfire when something important is about to be said. Harrison leaned forward now, resting his elbows on the table. "You know," he said, his voice low but clear, "you can always tell a lot about a place by the people they put out front. It's like a sign on the door. Tells you what kind of operation you're dealing with." Naya met his eyes for the first time since he'd sat down. They were bright, curious, not with interest, with hunger. She kept her voice calm. "Is there anything else I can get for you, sir?" He laughed softly. "Yeah, how about something authentic?" Jessica looked at him. "Just order, Harrison." He ignored her. "This is a French place, right?" he said to Naya. "But everything's written in plain old English. Kind of kills the mood." Naya nodded. "I can explain any dish you'd like." Harrison's eyebrows lifted. "In English?" He tilted his head, studying her like a puzzle he already thought he had solved. "Tell me," he said, "do you actually speak French?" Naya didn't rise to it. "I know the menu, sir." "The menu," he repeated, amused. "That's what I thought." He turned to Jessica, shaking his head. "Bonjour, baguette." "And that's about as far as it goes, right?" Jessica didn't laugh. She stared down at the table. Harrison turned back to Naya, eyes gleaming. "Watch closely," he said to Jessica. "This is where you find out how educated the staff really is." Then he did it. He switched languages, letting a stream of old formal French spill out fast and tangled, words rolling over each other like a river after a hard rain. He spoke with an exaggerated accent, heavy and dramatic, like a man performing for a crowd he believed couldn't understand the play. Naya recognized the trick right away. It wasn't about ordering food. It was about building a fence. A fence made of words that said, "I stand on this side, you stay on that one." The sounds washed over her, sharp and pointed, like cactus thorns carried on the wind. Jessica's face flushed. She looked at Naya, then away again. Harrison finished his speech and leaned back, folding his arms with a satisfied grin. He waited. He waited for the blank stare, the stammer, the apology. Naya stood very still. Inside her, the desert rose. She saw her grandmother by the fire, the sparks lifting into the night sky like tiny stars. She heard the old stories about chiefs who spoke once and changed the path of a whole tribe. She remembered long nights in quiet libraries, tracing the roots of languages that had been used to crown kings and break nations. The room faded. The clink of glasses, the soft music, the city outside the windows. All of it fell away. Harrison's smile began to falter, just a little. And in that small crack, Naya lifted her head. The fence he had built was about to fall. For a heartbeat, the room held its breath. Harrison sat back in his chair, arms folded, that confident grin still hanging on his face like a badge he believed no one could take from him. He was waiting for the moment he enjoyed most, the quiet stumble, the soft apology, the little nod that said, "You're right, you're above me." Naya didn't give him that. She didn't reach for her notepad. She didn't glance toward the manager. She didn't step back. She stepped forward. It was a small movement, barely the length of a boot heel, but it changed the shape of the space between them. Naya straightened her shoulders, the apron at her waist suddenly looking less like a uniform and more like a sash she no longer needed. Her hands folded calmly in front of her, steady as a stone set in the ground. When she spoke, the voice that came out was not the soft, practiced tone of a server. It was clear, it was measured, it carried weight. She answered in French, not the tangled, showy version Harrison had thrown at her like a net. This was smooth, clean, precise, the kind of French shaped in lecture halls and quiet libraries, sharpened by years of study and argument. Each word landed where it meant to, like a well-placed step across a river. Harrison blinked. Naya didn't rush. She took his long, winding sentence apart, piece by piece, correcting a tense here, a phrase there, the way a professor might guide a student back to the right line of thought. Her tone wasn't angry, it wasn't loud. It was patient. She explained calmly that if he wanted to sound impressive, he might start by using the right form of the verb he had just misused. She suggested, with a polite tilt of her head, that comparing duck skin to glass was a tired metaphor better suited for bad poetry than a serious menu. The words flowed steady and sure. Harrison's grin slipped. He tried to interrupt, but Naya didn't stop. She turned her attention to the wine glass he had rejected, lifting it just slightly so the light caught the deep red inside. Still speaking French, she explained the year of the bottle, the way the soil and the season shaped its taste, how the sharpness he had complained about wasn't a flaw, but a sign of young tannins that needed a patient palate. Then she paused. Just long enough. She offered him a gentle alternative, a sweeter wine, something simpler, something that might suit his taste better. The silence that followed felt heavy enough to press down on the tablecloth. At the next table, a man lowered his fork mid-bite. Somewhere near the bar, a glass stopped halfway to someone's lips. Even the soft music overhead seemed to fade into the walls. Harrison stared at her. For the first time since he'd walked through those doors, he didn't look like a man in control. He looked like a gambler who had just realized the cards in his hand weren't what he thought they were. His mouth opened, closed. He searched for words in French, in English, in anything, and found none that could climb over what she had just built. Jessica's reaction came first. A short, surprised laugh slipped out of her before she could stop it. She clapped a hand over her mouth, eyes wide, like she'd just felt a lock snap open somewhere inside her chest. Harrison turned toward her, sharp and confused, but the moment was already gone. Naya held his gaze for one last second. There was no triumph in her eyes, no cruelty, just a quiet, steady certainty. She switched back to English as smoothly as she'd switched into French. "I'll place your order," she said, "and I'll bring you the wine I think you'll find easier to enjoy." She gave a small, respectful nod toward Jessica. Then she turned. She didn't hurry. She didn't look back. Her steps carried her away from the table, the polished floor reflecting her movement like a trail of light behind her. Harrison was left sitting there, surrounded by the low hum of the restaurant, by eyes that were no longer impressed, by a silence that felt wide and dry and endless. Like standing alone in the middle of the desert, realizing the wind had changed, and you no longer knew which way led home. Harrison Sterling didn't follow Naya with his eyes when she walked away. He followed her with something darker. The room began to breathe again, the low hum of voices and clinking glasses slowly rising back to life. A waiter passed by with a tray of desserts. Someone laughed at a joke that had nothing to do with what had just happened. On the surface, Laroni tried to pretend the moment had passed, but Harrison sat very still. His jaw worked, slow and tight, like a man chewing on a bitter thought he couldn't swallow. He reached for his water, took a long drink, then set the glass down harder than he needed to. The sound snapped through the air. Jessica shifted in her seat. "Harrison, let's just eat, please." He didn't look at her. He looked toward the corridor where Naya had disappeared. There were two kinds of men in the old stories Naya's grandmother used to tell. The ones who lost and walked away, and the ones who lost and came back with a rope. Harrison was the second kind. He pushed his chair back and stood. "Hey," he called, his voice rising above the soft music. "Manager, I need the manager over here, now." Heads turned. Conversations dropped to whispers. Charles Henderson hurried over, his smile already strained. "Is there a problem, sir?" Harrison ran a hand over the table like he was searching for something, slow and theatrical. "My card," he said. "My black card. I left it right here when I went to the restroom, and now it's gone." Henderson blinked. "I'm sure we can find—" "I know where it went," Harrison cut in, his voice sharpening. "Your server took it." The room went still. Jessica's face drained of color. "Harrison, that's not true. I was sitting right here." Harrison ignored her. "I want her back out here," he said, loud enough for half the restaurant to hear. "And I want the police on the way. This place is supposed to be high-end, and you've got thieves working the floor." Phones came up. Someone near the bar whispered, "Is he serious?" Henderson hesitated, caught between the man in front of him and the 100 eyes now watching. He motioned to a busboy. "Go get her." Back in the service corridor, Naya was rinsing her hands at the sink, trying to slow her breathing. The adrenaline from the moment at the table still buzzed through her veins, sharp and restless. Kevin appeared in the doorway, eyes wide. "He says you stole his card. He's calling the cops." The words hit her like cold water. Stole. Her mind raced ahead faster than her heart could keep up. Police, reports, a record, a phone call to the restaurant owner, a call to the care facility upstate. We can't keep your father here if the payments stop. The future she was holding together with double shifts and tired feet felt like it was standing on a rotten plank. Naya wiped her hands on her apron and turned back toward the dining room. When she stepped out, every sound seemed louder. Every light felt brighter. Harrison stood in the center of the floor now, arms spread slightly like a preacher calling down judgment. "There she is," he said, pointing at her. "Search her. Check her pockets. She probably has it tucked away right now." Naya walked forward. She didn't rush. She didn't run. Her boots on the polished floor sounded like slow, steady drum beats. "I didn't take your card," she said, her voice calm. "And you know that." Harrison laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "Oh, I know exactly what you are. I saw your shoes. I saw how you looked at my watch. You people are all the same, always reaching for something you didn't earn." Jessica stood up. "Stop it. This is insane." Harrison stepped closer to Naya, invading her space. "Empty your pockets, right now, or I let the NYPD do it for you. Your choice." The air felt tight, thin, like standing on a high ridge with no wind. Naya could feel every eye on her, the weight of every phone camera, the hush of a crowd waiting to see which way the rope would fall. She thought of her father's hands, once strong enough to lift her onto a horse, now shaking as he tried to hold a spoon. She thought of the bills stacked on her small kitchen table, the care home 2 hours north that kept calling like a ticking clock. If she lost this job, she didn't just lose a paycheck. She lost the ground under her feet. Naya straightened her shoulders. "I won't," she said quietly. Harrison's smile returned, thin and sharp. "Then we wait for the cops." The word hung in the air like the creak of a gallows rope. And in that moment, it felt like the whole room had become an old frontier square, watching a woman stand alone in the dust, with no one stepping forward to say her name. For a long moment, no one moved. The word cop still hung in the air like the creak of a rope in an empty square. Harrison stood tall in the center of the floor, chest out, eyes bright with the kind of confidence that came from believing the world always bent his way. Phones were raised. Whispers slid across the tables like wind through dry grass. Naya stood her ground. Then a chair scraped softly against the floor. It wasn't loud, it wasn't sharp, but in the tight, waiting silence, it sounded like thunder. From the far corner of the room, a man rose. He had been sitting in the shadows all evening, nursing a single glass of dark amber liquor, turning the pages of a folded newspaper like he had nowhere else to be. Most people hadn't noticed him. Men like Harrison never did. They were too busy watching the center of the room to see what waited at the edges. The silver-haired man moved slowly, but there was nothing weak about the way he walked. His steps were measured, steady, like someone who had spent a lifetime knowing exactly where he was going and why. He wore a worn tweed jacket instead of a tailored suit, shoes polished but plain, no flash, no shine, just presence. He crossed the space between the tables as if it belonged to him, not in the way of ownership, but in the way of understanding. The room seemed to open for him without being asked. A waiter stepped aside. A couple leaned back in their chairs. Even the soft music overhead felt like it lowered itself. He stopped a few feet from Harrison. "That will be enough," the man said. His voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It carried the low, gravelly weight of stone settling into place. Harrison turned, irritation flashing across his face. "And who are you supposed to be?" "Sit down, old man. This doesn't concern you." The silver-haired man looked at him with something close to boredom. Not anger, not fear. Boredom. Then he glanced past Harrison, just for a second, and gave Naya a small nod. Not a bow, not a gesture of pity. A gesture of recognition. He turned back to Harrison. "I believe, Ernie," he said, "that if you check the inside pocket of your jacket, the left one, you will find your card." Harrison scoffed. "That's ridiculous. I didn't put it there." "Check," the man replied. It wasn't a suggestion. The word landed with the quiet force of a judge's gavel. Harrison hesitated. His hand twitched, half moving toward his jacket, then pulling back. The cameras were on him now. The room had shifted. The crowd that had been waiting to see Naya fall was suddenly watching him. With a sharp breath, Harrison shoved his hand into the inside pocket of his suit. His face changed. It wasn't slow. It wasn't subtle. One second he was smirking, the next his mouth hung open just slightly, like a man who had walked into a door he swore wasn't there. He pulled his hand out. Between his fingers, black and unmistakable, was the card. A sound rippled through the room, a collective gasp, soft but wide. The silver-haired man tilted his head. "Well," he said, "that's a surprise." Harrison stammered, I must have. This is a mistake." "Is it?" the man asked calmly. "Or is it a lie that didn't walk as far as you hoped it would?" Harrison's confidence drained out of him like water from a cracked canteen. He looked around, searching for a friendly face, a lifeline, anything. He found none. Jessica took a step back from him. Naya didn't move. The silver-haired man stepped closer, just enough to make Harrison feel the space shrink. "My name is Lucien Valmont," he said. The name fell into the room like a dropped coin in a deep well. Harrison froze. "Valmont," he whispered, "as in—" Lucien gave a thin smile. "As in the group that underwrites most of your fund's debt." Harrison swallowed. Lucien's voice stayed level, almost gentle. "You like to play big games, Mr. Sterling. You move numbers on screens and call it power. But power isn't what you flash. It's what holds you up when the ground starts to give." He gestured lightly toward the card in Harrison's hand. "And tonight your ground just shifted." Harrison's shoulders sagged. The man who had walked in like he owned the world now looked like someone who had just realized he was standing on land that belonged to someone else. Lucien turned his attention back to Naya. "Miss," he said, "I apologize for the trouble you were put through." There was no pity in his tone, only respect. The room exhaled. Outside, the city kept moving, horns and lights and footsteps rolling on like nothing had happened. But inside Lorany, the storm had broken. And for the first time that night, it wasn't Naya standing alone in the open. It was Harrison. Harrison still held the card in his hand like it had burned him. The room felt different now. The energy that had once leaned in his direction had turned, slow and steady, like a river changing its course. The phones that had been pointed at Naya were now aimed at him. The whispers no longer carried her name. Lucien Valmont stood where he was, calm as a weathered fence post in an open field. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't step closer. He didn't need to. "Do you know why men like you make me tired, Mr. Sterling?" Lucien asked, almost conversationally. "You confuse motion with strength, noise with power." Harrison swallowed. "This is ridiculous," he muttered. "You can't threaten my business over a misunderstanding at dinner." Lucien's eyes softened, but not with kindness, with certainty. "I'm not threatening you," he said. "I'm explaining your position." He reached into his jacket and pulled out his phone. It wasn't flashy. No gold trim, no heavy case, just a simple black rectangle, worn at the edges like a tool that had been used often. "My company holds the majority stake in the bank that backs your leverage," Lucien continued. "We carry most of your loans. We insure most of your risk. We are, to put it plainly, the ground you stand on." Harrison shook his head. "That's not possible. I'd know." Lucien gave a faint smile. "You would know if you ever looked behind the curtain instead of admiring the stage." He tapped the screen once, twice. "I can make a call," Lucien said, "and by morning every line of credit you rely on will be pulled. Your accounts will freeze. Your partners will start calling. Your board will start asking questions you don't have answers for." The words weren't sharp. They were flat. Harrison's breathing changed. Shorter. Faster. "You can't do that," he whispered. "That would ruin me." Lucien nodded. Yes, it would. The wolf had spent his life chasing smaller prey, snapping at heels, baring teeth at anything that flinched. Now he had run headfirst into something vast and unmoving, a shape in deep water that didn't need to chase at all. Harrison's shoulders slumped. His chest, once puffed out like a badge of honor, folded inward. The man who had filled the room with his voice now struggled to find one. "Please," he said, the words slipping out before he could stop it. Lucien studied him for a moment, the way a rancher might study a horse that had finally been broken, not with cruelty, but with finality. "I don't care about your money," Lucien said. "I care about your character. And tonight, you showed me exactly how much you have." He slipped the phone back into his pocket. "Leave," he added, "before I decide to teach you what it feels like to lose something you can't buy back." Harrison looked around the room one last time. No one met his eyes. Not the manager, not the diners, not the servers who had kept their heads down while he played king. Jessica stood up. The sound of her chair scraping against the floor cut through the silence, like a gunshot in a canyon. Harrison turned toward her, relief flickering across his face. "Jess, come on, let's go." She didn't move. She picked up her small clutch from the table, her hands steady in a way they hadn't been all night. She looked at Harrison, really looked at him, like she was seeing him for the first time without the shine of his money blinding her. "No," she said. The word was quiet. It landed like a stone. Harrison frowned. "What do you mean, no?" "I mean, I'm not leaving with you," she said. Her voice wavered, then grew stronger. "I'm done being the quiet one in your shadow. I'm done apologizing for the way you treat people." Harrison laughed, a thin, brittle sound. "Don't be dramatic. You don't know what you're saying?" Jessica took a step back from him. "I know exactly what I'm saying." She turned to Naya, eyes shining with something that looked like both shame and gratitude. "I'm sorry I didn't stop him sooner. I should have." Naya nodded once. That was all. Jessica faced Harrison again. "You think power is something you hold in your hand?" she said. "Tonight I learned it's something you choose." She walked past him without another word. The front doors opened. Cold night air rushed in. Jessica stepped out into it alone. Harrison stood there staring at the empty space she left behind. Lucian moved to Naya's side. "It's a rare thing," he said softly, "to watch two truths surface in the same room. One about money, one about freedom." Harrison didn't speak again. He turned and followed the path Jessica had taken, shoulders hunched, steps quick and small. The doors closed behind him, the sound echoing through Lorne like the end of a long, hollow shout. The wolf had run. The whale hadn't moved at all. And in the space where Harrison Sterling's shadow used to fall, Naya Greywolf stood in the light, still breathing, still standing, with the world finally beginning to look back at her differently. The applause never really came. People shifted in their seats. Glasses were lifted, set down again. The room at Lorone slowly found its rhythm, like a river returning to its course after a fallen tree is carried away. But around Naya and Lucian, there was a pocket of stillness that didn't move with the rest of the world. Lucian studied her the way a man studies a trail in the dirt, not just looking at where it leads, but how it was made. "You didn't just learn that French in a restaurant," he said gently. "You learned it in places where words matter." Naya's hands tightened around the edge of her apron. Lucian continued, "Years ago, I read a paper. It was about how language is used to claim land, to crown rulers, to turn one group of people into subjects instead of neighbors. The author compared European aristocratic speech to the way indigenous languages were pushed aside, silenced, treated as something smaller." He met her eyes. "The name on that paper was Naya Greywolf." The world seemed to tilt. Naya let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. "You read that?" "I funded the grant that published it," Lucian replied. "I wondered what happened to the young woman who wrote with that kind of fire. Then tonight I heard that same fire in your voice." Naya looked down at the polished floor, at her reflection split and blurred by the shine. For a moment she saw two versions of herself, the student with ink-stained fingers and a backpack full of books, and the server with tired shoes and a tray balanced on one shoulder. "My father is a carpenter," she said quietly. Lucian didn't interrupt. "He works on the reservation, builds porches, fixes fences, puts up beams for people who can't lift them anymore." Her voice softened as she spoke, like she was sanding down the edges of each word. "He taught me how to stand straight, how to look someone in the eye, how to keep my hands steady when things go wrong." She paused. 3 years ago, I was in a classroom in the city talking about dead languages and living ones. I had a scholarship. I had a chance to go overseas, keep studying, keep digging into the bones of words and history." Lucian nodded. He could see it now. The path that had almost been taken. "The phone rang," Naya went on. "A neighbor from back home. She said my dad had fallen off a ladder at a job site. Stroke. Massive. I flew back that night." Her fingers traced the line of her apron without her noticing. "When I got to the hospital, he was awake, but he couldn't talk. The man who used to sing old songs under his breath while he worked couldn't say my name." Lucian felt the weight of that land between them. The doctors said he needed long-term care, therapy, a place that knew how to handle someone who'd lost half his body and most of his words. Naya swallowed. "The insurance he had didn't cover much. The bills came faster than I could read them." She let out a small, humorless breath. "Funny, isn't it? I spent years studying how power moves through language, and then I learned how power really moves. Through paperwork. Lucian didn't smile. I left school, Naya said. I packed up my books. I told my professors I'd be back in a semester. She never said the word lie, but it sat there all the same. I found work, any work, then better work, then this place. The tips were good, good enough to keep my dad in a facility where the nurses had time to sit with him instead of just check boxes on a chart. She finally looked up at Lucian. Every month I make a choice, she said. Dreams or care, future or now. I pick now. Lucian leaned back in his chair, the old wood creaking under him like it was thinking too. A man once told me, he said, that the measure of a person isn't what they build when the road is clear. It's what they carry when the road turns to mud. He looked at her, really looked at her. You carried your father, and you buried your own path to do it. Naya felt something warm pressed behind her eyes, but she didn't let it fall. I didn't bury it, she said softly. I just set it down for a while. Lucian nodded. Sometimes that's the bravest kind of burial. The kind where you leave a marker so you can find your way back. The restaurant noise crept closer again. A laugh at the bar, the clink of a plate, the low hum of a city that never paused for anyone's story. But in that small space between them, Naya's past lay open like a map in the dust. And for the first time in a long while, someone else could see the road she had walked, and the one she still hoped to walk again. Lucian didn't speak right away. He let Naya's words settle between them, like dust after a long ride. The noise of the restaurant crept back in. A laugh from the bar, the scrape of a chair, the low murmur of people returning to their meals. Life, as it always did, tried to move on. Lucian rested his hands on the table, fingers folded, and studied her with the quiet focus of a man looking at a map he hadn't seen in years. You know, he said, most people think opportunity arrives like a trumpet. Loud, shiny, impossible to miss. He shook his head. It usually comes like a knock on the door you almost don't answer. Naya offered a small, tired smile. Lucian reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and pulled out a simple business card. No gold trim, no raised lettering, just thick cream paper and clean black print. The Valmont Foundation. He slid it across the table toward her. We're opening a new research wing here in the city, he said. Archival work, translation. The kind of projects that don't make headlines but change how people understand their own history. Naya looked at the card but didn't touch it. I need someone who understands more than grammar, Lucian continued. I need someone who understands what words cost, what they take, what they give back. He met her eyes. I need you. The room felt smaller, like the walls had leaned in to listen. Naya shook her head slowly. I can't leave my father, she said. The care facility is 2 hours north. I visit every Sunday. Sometimes Tuesday nights if I pick up enough shifts. This job, she gestured around the room, it pays in tips. It's fast money. Academic work doesn't do that. Lucian nodded. You're right. Most of it doesn't. He took a pen from his pocket and turned over the card. He wrote a number on the back, then slid it a little closer to her. Naya's breath caught. The figure stared back at her, steady and impossible. That's a base salary, Lucian said, before benefits. Naya felt the floor tilt under her feet, even though she was sitting down. Lucian went on like he was discussing the weather, health, dental, travel, and since the Valmont Group holds a controlling interest in a neurological institute in Westchester. Naya's head snapped up. St. Jude's, he said. Her heart began to pound. They specialize in post-stroke recovery, Lucian continued. Speech therapy, physical therapy, long-term care, the kind that doesn't rush people through a checklist. Naya's hands curled into the edge of the table. I can have your father transferred there, Lucian said, covered under our company plan. No waiting list, no paperwork battles. You'll be able to see him more, not less. The world went quiet around her. All the numbers she kept in her head, monthly fees, medication costs, overtime hours, late-night shifts, scattered like leaves in the wind. Why? Naya whispered. Lucian leaned back, the chair creaking softly beneath him. Because tonight, he said, You stood in front of a man who thought money made him untouchable. You didn't shout. You didn't beg. You didn't bow. He looked at her, steady and certain. You used your mind. Naya felt heat behind her eyes. She blinked hard. I invest in people, Lucian went on. Not just companies, not just ideas, people. And I believe you're worth the risk. He pushed the card the rest of the way across the table. Monday morning, 9 o'clock, wear comfortable shoes. We have a lot of reading to do. Naya finally reached out and picked up the card. It felt heavier than paper. It felt like a key. She looked around the restaurant, the golden lights, the polished tables, the place that had been her battlefield and her lifeline all at once. For the first time in a long while, she didn't see a cage. She saw a crossroads. Lucian stood, straightening his jacket. The road doesn't always give back what it takes, he said. But sometimes, if you keep walking, it meets you halfway. He gave her a small nod and turned to leave. Naya sat there, the card warm in her hand, her heart beating hard and fast, like a horse sensing open land ahead. She wasn't just being saved. She was being invited home to the life she had set down in the dust and never stopped carrying with her. Time did what it always did best. It moved, not in a rush, not with noise, just steady, quiet, like a river cutting its way through stone. 6 months after the night at Lorney, the city felt different to Naya Graywolf. The rush of footsteps on the sidewalk still sounded like rain on tin. The horns still blared. The lights still burned late into the night. But somewhere between the library walls and the morning sun, she had found a rhythm that belonged to her again. The Valmont Foundation's reading room sat high above the street, its tall windows letting in long bands of pale light that drifted across rows of leather-bound volumes. Dust motes floated in the air like tiny wandering stars. The place smelled of old paper and quiet purpose. Naya sat at a wide oak table, a faded letter spread out in front of her. The ink was thin, the handwriting slanted, the words written by a man who had been waiting for a trial that history never recorded in a book. She leaned close, tracing the lines with her eyes, listening to the voice behind the language the way her grandmother had taught her. A soft hum of wheels broke the silence. Naya looked up. The glass doors at the far end of the room opened, and a nurse stepped inside, guiding a motorized wheelchair forward. In it sat her father. Thomas Graywolf looked smaller than he had in her memory, his shoulders narrower, his hands resting carefully on the armrests. But the gray in his hair had been trimmed. His flannel shirt was clean and pressed, and there was a color in his face that hadn't been there for years. Naya stood so fast her chair scraped loudly against the floor. "Dad," she said, her voice catching. The nurse smiled gently and stepped back. Thomas lifted his head. His eyes found hers. For a moment, they just looked at each other across the quiet room. All the words Naya had saved up over 3 years pressed against her chest at once. The apologies, the promises, the stories she had never told him. Thomas took a slow breath. You could see the effort in it, the way his chest rose and fell like he was climbing a hill no one else could see. His mouth moved, searching for the shape of a sound. Naya took a step closer, her hands shaking. Another breath. Then rough and low, like gravel rolling down a riverbank, the word came out. Naya! It wasn't smooth, it wasn't perfect. It was everything. The room blurred. Naya dropped to her knees in front of him, her hands finding his, her forehead pressing against his knuckles like she was back on the red earth of home. "Dad," she whispered. Thomas squeezed her fingers, his grip weak but certain. His eyes shone with something that didn't need language at all. The nurse quietly turned away, giving them the space of the moment. Outside the tall windows, the city kept moving. Cars passed. People hurried. Somewhere a siren wailed and faded. Inside the reading room, the world stood still. Naya leaned back just enough to look at her father's face. She saw the man who had taught her to ride, to stand tall, to speak up when the wind was loud. The man who had lost his words and was finding them again, one careful step at a time. She laughed through her tears. "You did it," she said. "You found me." Thomas nodded, slow and steady. Later, as they sat side by the window, Naya told him about the night at the restaurant, about the man who tried to break her with money, about the one who saw her with something deeper than a balance sheet. Thomas listened, his head tilted, his eyes following her face like he was reading a story written in the air. When she finished, he took another breath and said, "Proud." The word landed softly, but it stayed. Naya looked out at the city, at the towers and streets in endless motion. She thought of the dust roads of home, the firelight, her grandmother's voice telling her that every word carries a piece of the people who speak it. Money can buy land, power can buy fear, but it takes language, knowledge, and courage to earn respect. Naya Grey Wolf had walked a long road to learn that, and now at last she was standing on her own ground.